A man chooses, a slave obeys.
Welcome to the Ethics in Video Games podcast, where we explore issues at the intersection of ethics and video games.
What follows is a series of graphic, interactive scenes that we can't show you.
In this episode of Ethics in Video Games, we have a very first guest. She is a UX strategist, writer, and speaker. She has a PhD in psychology and has worked for Ubisoft, LucasArts, and Epic Games. I've read her truly amazing book called The Gamer's Brain, which talks about the neuroscience of the user experience. And I've attended her excellent webinar about how our implicit biases hinder our efforts to make our industry more diverse. She has a new book, The Psychology of Games, that I have not yet read. Please welcome to the show, Celia Hodent.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
I feel like we should clap. You are our very first guest. I feel like you deserve a clap already. All right. We're very excited to have you, Celia. God, I want to just talk a little bit about why we wanted to have this episode with you, right? Mm-hmm. We keep meaning to have an episode about sexism in games. And there's so much that can be said about sexism games, and we're going to have these episodes. But whenever, let's say my classes talk about sexism in video games, the solution is always, we just need to get more women in the game industry, right? That will solve. And this is the solution not just for sexism in the game industry, but for sexism in any industry. Right? It's always the solution is let's bring in more women. So what's the problem? Right? So we thought we'd bring you in and talk about what the problem is and what the solutions might be.
Sure. Okay. So there are a lot of problems with that, but it's indeed the best solution for inclusion. If you want to be more inclusive, you need to let people in, so then your products are going to be more inclusive because you have more diversity on your teams, and so that's going to counter your blind spots, because we all have blind spots. So why is it so difficult? So there are different problems. So first of all, depending on the job position, you might not have an equal amount of women and men who have the degree that works for this position. Let's say computer science, we know that we have less women than men that grade computer science, which is not the case in other sciences, like in doctors, medical doctors. I think it's pretty much even today. Like in biology, it's pretty much even. But for computer science, for whatever reason, we have less women who graduate. So of course, if you have a lesser pool of women than men who are graduating into the topic or into the science that you need, that's going to be a bit harder. But on top of that, we have biases that makes us hire the people who look like us. We have lots of biases, but this is one of the main problems. And if you're the hiring manager for a position and you're a white man, you're going to be more likely to favor another white man, and not even because you want to. It's because we have what we call the hinder bias, which is a tendency to favor the people who appear to be in the same group as we perceive we are. So,
and that's called the anchor bias, you say?
The in-group bias.
In-group, sorry. Yes.
Yeah, there's an anchor bias. That's something.
That's a different thing. Right.
Anchor bias is that the first thing you hear essentially becomes more important to you than other things you hear. Right, simply because you heard it first.
So the first thing you hear, it's an anchor from which you compare other stuff.
Right.
So that's the reason why, like, for example, companies, when they do sales, they put an anchor first, say, oh, this item was $95 and now it's $75. And so you have the anchor. So that makes you perceive the new price as being very interesting because of the anchor.
Sort of gives you a relative point.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes, I see.
Though it is interesting, right? When I think about a gamer, right? So, my original conception of a gamer, right? Back in, if you want to go back to the 90s or the early aughts, right? The teenager.
You mean the stereotype, right?
The stereotype, right? That's the stereotype, right? Mm-hmm. That could also be because that's where I first heard of, let's say, that was my original conception, that also might remain around for a very, very long time because it came first. So the anchoring bias might have a lot to do with how we think about gamers, even though those demographics have changed.
I don't know, because first it was the picture of the family playing together. If you remember the first advertisement for Atari, it was always like a little boy, a little girl, and their parents all playing together. Right. So that was the original. It's more like in the early 90s, with 3D games and Wolfenstein and more shooter games that became more the stereotype of the young men playing video games. So that changed. It was not the case initially.
Right, and I do believe that early on in the business of video games, there were more women. I mean, it was a very, very small industry for a long time, right?
Well, in computer science, like the first programmers were women.
Right. Yeah.
And all of a sudden, it's making money. Like, wait a minute, move away, women.
And something changed, and it ended up like ballooning out in terms of men, but not in the same way for women. I'm not sure exactly what happened.
Celia was talking about that.
Yeah, I have a graph. I don't exactly remember what. I think it's around the 70s or the 80s. You see like computer science where women it's growing like the other sciences, like women are graduating. But around the 70s or the 80s, you see this falling back down. And that's really weird because it's not like women cannot do science. Obviously, we can graduate in other sciences about the same percentage that men today. Well, it depends on exactly what, but overall is pretty equal in the West. But for computer science, it's really weird. Like you see this big fall down. I think it was in 70s or the early 80s. So I'm not sure why. There's a lot of different theories, but it could be because women don't feel welcome, or they're not included in the recruitment from universities. It could be like you were saying, like the stereotypes of whether it is video games or computers. At some point, we just start portraying men. It's really hard to tell, but and we don't know how much impact our biases have, especially stereotype and how representation is in the media, and how this is really impacting people's behavior. But it's fair to say that if you don't see anyone that looks like you in an area, it's when you're young, it might be hard for you to really picture yourself becoming that person. So that's a lot of theories that we might have, and once you have a group of people that predominantly are in an area, then you have the in-group bias that we were saying earlier, and so you have a tendency to hire the people that you perceive as belonging as your own group. So if you're white, if you're a man, you don't even realize this is going on, but you're gonna have more scrutiny with people that you perceive being outside of your group. So with a woman or a person of color, and so that it has a tendency to make us hire the people that look like us. And so once you have a group that's predominant in an area, then it gets worse and worse just because of that, the in-group bias.
All right. Do you think that there's some sort of subconscious idea that it'll be easier to communicate with the person who probably thinks like me?
So it is completely implicit. That's oftentimes expressed as the having the cultural fit. And or when you're hiring, so I have a comic strip that illustrates pretty well what's happening. So let's say you're a white man and you do want to have diversity. So you interview a lot of different people, like a woman, people of color. And you try to make it fair. You ask them the same questions, and you feel that it's fair. But then you have a white man, so someone with more like the same background as you, and you see on this resume, oh, you've been to the same school as I did. Say, I don't know, Stanford. Right. And then you say, oh, did you have that professor? And then you start to have a conversation with that person that is going to be more loose or maybe more emotional. And then you're going to feel a connection with that person that has nothing to do with that person's skills, but just because you found that connection that comes from the fact that that person is from the same school, and so they're likely from the same background, and so they're likely homogeneous, as compared to you. And at the end of the day, you might say something like, "Yeah, I had a good feeling with that person." And again, we post-rationalize that. We're gonna say, "No, I did a very strong hiring process. I had some standardized tests or questions, whatever." But the problem is that because this is implicit, we don't even realize this is going on. And this is how we end up with a team that is very homogeneous. But we post-rationalize because also of our cognitive dissonance. We don't want to be that person who's not inclusive. And like, no, it's not my fault. We just hired the best people. It's not our fault. They all happen to be white men. And so this is the sort of discourse that you hear. And it's really hard to unravel because, I would say, I don't know, I'm going to say 90%, I have no clue what the real percentage would be, but most people don't really realize, and that's what's going on. And they do really want to try to be inclusive, but they don't really see where their problem is. And this is how we perpetuate discrimination without realizing it. That's the reason why we need to understand what's going on so that we can always, say, well, it's not my fault. I didn't know about this bias. At some point, we do need to realize what's going on there so we can fix it.
Right. And I think we sort of understand that the more we understand about the way we think, the more that we can inoculate ourselves against these subconscious biases, right?
Yes and no. Yes, in the sense that once you understand what's going on, you can label things like the anchor, bias anchoring, or the in-group bias. And there's a lot of other biases that we have. It makes it easier to understand what's going on and why you did what you did, or it's actually easier to spot these biases in other people rather than ourselves. But because they're implicit, because they're implicit, we're still going to fall for it. So maybe if you've learned about them, you're going to be able to spot them maybe afterwards once you try to think about what you did during the day and how you reacted to things. But at the end of the day, we don't have our brain is pretty biased, and the more tired we are, the hardest it is for us to spot these issues. And typically, so yes, if it's during the weekend, you're well rested and you have a conversation with someone who's relaxed, you might be able to spot one of your biases as they're, calling in. But most of the time we're super stressed out. We're in the middle of a pandemic. Everybody is, we're scared about the future, about the planet. Your boss, can be stressing you out, or you can have problems with your spouse at home or whatever is going on. You can have like someone you love that is sick. So all of that is just going to be more load, your cognitive load. Right. And this is when we can't take any more effort to just stop and think before everything we do. And it's so ingrained in ourselves. This is what Daniel Kahneman is mentioning, is like a system one, which is fast, automatic. This is the system, it's like a mode of thinking that we use most of the day just because it's efficient, because it's fast. But this is where the biases lie. And so even though you know about them, you're still going to fall for them. And that's the reason why I do a lot of, when I do my presentations, I try to do a lot of little games, mind games, hoping that at least everyone is going to fall for at least one. Because the problem is that when you feel that you're better than others to spot these biases, then you have overconfidence, and this is when it's still bad, because then you believe that you're better than the others, and you're not going to fall for these biases.
It's the bias.
Yeah, exactly.
So I went through your slides again.
So it's never ending.
Yeah. I went through your slides again as prep for this conversation and fell for them, even though I had seen them.
Really?
I fell for the one with the car with
the cards.
With like if it's an A on one side and a 3 on the other.
Yeah. Do you want me to explain this game to people?
Please. And if you don't mind, I'll take that slide out and put it in the Facebook for when we post this this on Facebook, we'll put the when we post a link to the podcast on the Facebook, I'll put this in the comments too.
Okay. Yeah. So imagine you have a deck of cards, and this rule is always true. There's always a letter on one side of the card, and there's always a number on its flip side. And we show 4 cards, 2 cards with a letter side up, and 2 cards with a number side up. So you see 4 cards on screen. You see A, C, 3, and 7. So 2 cards with the letter side up and 2 cards with the number side up. And then I ask, for a little game, like, what are the card or cards that you need to turn over to verify if the following rule is true? If there's an A on one side of the card, then there's a 3 on the other side. So the 4 cards are A, C, 3, 7. And I ask people which card we need to flip to verify if there's an A on one side of the card, then there's a 3 on the other side. So what did you answer?
A.
Yeah, I mean, presumably A, right?
Yeah. So
or the 3.
No, not the 3.
see.
So most answers are A only or A and 3, but both of the answers are wrong.
No.
I know.
See?
Yeah, I know. So you do need to flip A because so it's deductive reasoning. In deductive reasoning, you have a premise, if something, and then a conclusion, then something else. So let's say if it rains, then the pavement is going to be wet. So to verify this rule, you have to wait until it rains because otherwise you can't verify this rule. So here, if A, then 3, we need to have A somewhere to verify this rule. So we have a card we know there's an A on one side, so we absolutely need to flip it to verify if indeed we have a 3 on this other side. We do not need to flip 3 because I didn't say if A then 3 and vice versa. Whatever is behind the 3, we don't care because this is not going to invalidate the rule if A then 3. The pavement could be wet because it's been washed. It's not going to change the fact that if it rains, it is also wet. So we don't care what's behind 3. That's also why we don't care what's behind C. But we do want to flip over 7 because if you find an A behind a 7, then it would invalidate the rule. Mm-hmm. And so that's a bias that we have. It's not that we're not capable of logical reasoning, deductive reasoning. It's just that, again, we try to find a solution fast and we get prompted by A and 3 and the instruction. So we have a tendency to just focus on that. It's just hard, especially when it's abstract to think logically in that way. But if I tell you, if you're our bartender and you're starting your shift at the bar and you have 4 people there, for 2 people you know what they're drinking. One is drinking alcohol and one is drinking Coke, and then the 2 others you know them, so you know their age. One is 17 and the other one is 30. And the rule is, who do you need? What IDs and glasses do you need to check to verify if there's alcohol in the glass? Then the drinker is 21 or older in the US. Then it's clear that you need to verify the person who drinks alcohol, the A, that is it, is that person of age. And you need to verify the person who's underage to check if that person is not drinking alcohol. And the others, you don't care. It's the exact same game, but now I put in a context that it makes it easier for you to just go with the flow and go to system 1. And so this is really what we do when we work on UX. We try to understand what are the limitations of the brain, and we have very solid limitations in terms of perception, attention, and memory, but we also have more subtle limitations in terms of reasoning, and so we need to understand all that so that we can offer the best experience possible. But in games, we can also put the challenge where we want it to be.
Celia, before I want to get back to, I want to ask you about meritocracy and the state of women in industry and all that stuff. But before we do, I realize, can you explain to our listeners what exactly UX is?
Sure. So it means user experience, and it's about considering the experience that the end user is going to have with the product as we develop the product. So it's a mindset, it's a philosophy more than anything that has a lot of different roles and disciplines. For example, you have the UX designer who is going to start by empathize with the user and try to figure out, why would a user use that product? What are their needs? How they would use it in their everyday lives, so that they can think about how to design it in the best way possible for the users. And these people prototype and then test these prototypes with users. So at every step of the process, the human is going to use the product is at the center of what we do. This is always what we call human-centered design. And then you have other people like UX researchers that really help doing the research to make sure like people, what is their experience and is it the thing that we hoped for them? So we cannot build an experience. An experience by definition is what happened in people's minds as they interact with a product. And so the UX researcher is here to verify what is the experience that they're having. Is it frustrating or not? Or can they use the product intuitively? And is it satisfying their needs? And is this matching the intentions? So that's a bunch of people working with this in mind. And ultimately, it's more philosophy that the whole company needs to have in order to always think about the human first, so that we can satisfy them. And the idea is that if they're happy, then they gonna stay and be truthful to the brand or talk about it, etc. So it's a win-win situation.
Yeah
Right.
Yeah. And my students have always heard me talk about how I feel like the game designer is the point person for that, for within the team but you're right that everybody in the company needs to be thinking about this, right?
Yeah, because otherwise it doesn't work if not everybody thinks about that. But
right.
You have some expertise that is needed to really have the proper methodologies and tools and science behind it, because that's the reason why we need cognitive science to understand this, because we need to understand the limitation of the brains, because the experience that people are going to have with the product happens in their minds. And so you need to understand what are the limitations, because you are the one making the product. You know your stuff too well. So it's always hard to anticipate how someone new interacting with the product, how they going to perceive it. And perception is subjective. We don't all perceive the world as it is. We all have a different construction of it. So we need to take a step back and verify all these things.
Right.
Okay, so let me go back to the meritocracy thing.
Yeah.
Right? Okay, so I know we took a little detour there, but okay, so here I am, right? I'm working for a game company, and I need to hire the best person possible. Mm-hmm. And I want the best. I mean, I want the best for my company, right? Now, what is the best though? Is kind of can be sometimes a difficult question, right? Yeah. It depends on context. It depends what we're talking about. And we can go a bunch of different ways here, right? So I'm thinking, you talked about computer science, and computer science might be the simplest maybe part, right? Do I know how to program, right? Mm-hmm. And you can give someone a test, and it's possible maybe to even do that in a blind process, right? So the classic one here is the classical musicians that you or this is a famous case where essentially when they used to do in-person auditions where you can see who the person auditioning was, women used to get hired very very rarely. Now that in classical music, orchestras have a blind process where all you do is listen. Women get hired a lot more, about half, I believe. All right, but when you're looking there, you're looking for just skill, though it's also not just skill. There's also a subjective element to it, right?
Yeah. So that's the blind audition is to combat in-group bias, but that's the only thing in combat. It's not doing anything with the fact that discrimination happens very early, and you have some population that marginalized populations that don't have the same access to musical schools, for example, to begin with. So that's not going to change that. So it's only helping a little bit, but it's not helping that much for diversity, because we had the problem of access, equal opportunities at the beginning. So there's that. And on top of that, people have a tendency to hire just one person instead of hire for a team. it's rare that a person is just going to work in a silo. And even if it's the best person to do that job, most of the time they have to communicate with other people. They have to understand what the people are trying to accomplish so that they can program it in the best way. There's a lot of communication needed. And people have a tendency to just say, well, if that person is the fastest to do something and we do a test, we also need to make sure what the test is testing, because we have problems also with that. Tests can be biased. But also we want to make sure we hire for a team. And if your team is not diverse, at the end, your product is not going to be as good because you're going to have all the same blind spots. It's going to be hard to innovate because everybody's going to have the same mindset. And so at the end of the day, your company is not going to be as innovative or efficient or, groundbreaking just because it's very homogeneous. So we have to stop thinking about individuals, but also think about how to hire for a team. And diversity is a great strength within a team.
Right. So notice, right? Because the first part could be, where I was going with it originally, right? Because you can say, well, we're not just, the reason we can't just look for your skills is because we need to see that you fit in. But once you talk about fitting in and communicating well, that can really lead to a homogeneous team unless you have this value of ahead of time, right? We're thinking we need to have the diversity built in ahead of time, and that we need to learn how to work with the diversity as opposed to look for someone that could already work well with the team, because the diversity is supposed to give us this added value.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah, I was more referring to you have a lot of people that stay in a company even though they're quite toxic with their colleagues, but they stay because they're supposedly like super good. And this is not taking into account the fact that this person is actually not helping anyone else, and that person makes other people less efficient at their jobs just because that person is toxic. So I was more referring to that. But it's true that what you're saying, that's the reason why you have to define what are the values in your company and what do you mean by cultural fit? Because oftentimes we just end up hiring the people who look like us, and we just post-rationalize because cultural fit, whatever that means. So we need to define what that means. So a cultural fit could be, well, that person needs to respect their colleagues and not being what's the term, like talking down to others and be disrespectful. That could be a value that you have. And then if you can spot a behavior that goes against this value, then you can absolutely say, well, that person goes against our cultural values, and therefore we cannot keep that person or hire this person. But you've listed what you mean by cultural value. If you just say cultural fit or cultural value without explicitly tell what that is, then this is when you can absolutely hire homogeneous team just because you feel it's going to be easier for people to communicate. But that's not what I meant. Right. Yeah, I figured. Can we bring in the riot situation as an example of this? Mm-hmm. Because as I understand, that's what they were trying to do, right? Right. So Riot had this policy where the idea is they're looking for the best, and the best meant for them, hardcore gamers that really understand what the gaming community is like. And which seems to kind of make sense, right? You've got essentially a team that's creating a game for players. You want them to understand the players. But can you talk a little bit about how this conception of how this is the value you want everyone to share might impact an issue like diversity? Yeah, so there's different things. It's either you want to make a game that is for niche people, and then you believe you understand who the players are gonna play that game is, and you just hire all the people that look the same. That I find this a bit weird, because then you're supposing that you understand the whole planet. I mean, we're making games for everybody today, and that's assuming that you understand who is going to be the profile of people going to play that game, and these people just look like you, and therefore you just are going to hire the people who look like you, because this is how you think that's going to work out. To me, it's just cutting off a bunch of potential players that would have probably love your game, but because now it's so homogeneous that they don't really feel included, and then you might have some harassment that is pretty present in some games, because then the players who feel that they're part of that niche and that elite gang, every time they see someone or feel that someone is not from that gang, then they're gonna harass them. And so now you're building a product that's going to be exclusive. Why would you do such a thing? I really don't understand the premise of why would you. We know that any design is going to exclude some people by definition. If you make a design with a lot of colors, like I show a game where I ask people to recognize pattern of colors, and the gamers immediately recognize Street Fighter, so the gamers who played Street Fighter. But I know that I'm excluding colorblind people when I do that game, and so I explain afterwards, and I apologize. So we know that by definition, a design is gonna exclude some people. But here it's and we try to understand who we're excluding and make sure that we remove all unnecessary barriers. But here it's all about just adding barriers just because we think this is what we want to do. I don't understand that reasoning, to be honest with you. You just want to restrict the game for some people, but then it goes international, and then all of a sudden, well, we have diversity problems. Well, yeah. What did you expect? So yeah, we need to understand what is it we're doing, and that when we do that, we are excluding people. So why would you exclude people when you make a product?
And this is true for whether they look, you say, when they look like you, but also when they think like you, right? Mm-hmm. We want to have a diverse population of people who think differently.
Yeah, but then this is how you end up with a lot of characters, and they all seem super diverse. But then if you look more closely, the male characters are super diverse, and you have a lot of different body types. But then the women character, they all look like hourglasses, and they all half naked. And you're like, this is weird. Did you not realize that this was going on? And then like, what do you mean? It's like, this is what people want. And it turns out that this can turn out. A lot of people who don't necessarily always. I mean, I have nothing against sexy characters, men or women identified. It's just that it's a problem when it's about women and there's only one type of character, and that these are only ones that are objectified, or they're the only ones that are extremely sexy. Because then first of all, it's just weird, and then as a woman, you're like, I don't feel that this game is for me. And a lot of men also react that way, because it's not because you're a man that you absolutely want to have see sexy women half naked all the time. And so that's making a lot of assumptions, but it's also feeding what we call the self-fulfilling prophecy, which is that's something that happens a lot in companies. Is like people saying, well, we're making a game, there's going to be niche, and so we expect that it's going to be hardcore gamers, and so we expect these people to be young men. And like, okay, so you're already making a leap based on stereotypes. Okay, but whatever. And say, well, because this is our audience, we're going to give them what they want, which is like half naked women. So there's a lot of leaps that made there, but then the game is shipped, and then they might do a survey to try to figure out, who's playing, and say, well, so look, there's 95% men playing that game. We were right. It's like, no, you make decisions along the way to actually select, like exclude some people just because of your art direction or your decisions. And so this is what we call self-fulfilling prophecy. You make something true that at the beginning was just a stereotype, but because you fed into the stereotype, this is what you get. And so we see that a lot.
And you leave money on the table when you do that.
Yeah.
Because, if you've made it so that only 5% of the women will actually play your game, but there's probably another 45% boost to your sales if you didn't do that.
Yeah.
Because then you might have a more equitable, more equal player base.
Yeah, but that's the problem. We never see what could have been. It's just like people saying, well, we're going to save money by putting down the walls in at the office, before the pandemic, and we end up with a lot of open space, but then productivity really falls down, and there's been some study that trying to figure that out, because you get much more interrupted when you're in an open space. But then the company just saw the savings that they made on the building itself and on renting space, and they don't see what they're losing in terms of productivity, because it's not something that we measure easily, and it's something that might have been, we can't really grasp anything about it. It's just like if you make some invest some money to do a play test before you ship a game, that's going to cost money, but you don't know what you might have lost if you did not do the playtest and did not identify big problems that would have resulted in less conversion or people being frustrated and leave your game. So that's the problem. We don't A/B test everything, and so you just don't know what you missed out. And this is how we end up with doing the same things over and over again, because people don't understand what they're missing out.
I want to go back to kind of the earlier point, right? Because before you do any of this, right, you have a team that's coming up with the product. And, right, the way Celia talked about it earlier, right, is a lot of times people begin with the assumption of who the product is going to be for. And that one of the values of diversity is supposed to be that if you get a diverse team ahead of time, right, they might give you a very different idea of who the product is for. So as you're going through the design, you're going to get different design elements that you're then going to end up testing out.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's if you have someone who's colorblind on your team, that person immediately is gonna make you realize that, hey, the color palette that you've chosen is not good, or right now you convey information just through color. Hello, there's 8% of the male population that's colorblind. This is not gonna be okay for them. It's 8% for men. It's I think it's 0.5 for women, because it's on the X chromosome.
I know it's smaller. I know it's much, much smaller for women.
Yeah, because for women you have to have it on both of your X chromosomes because it's recessive. So my dad is colorblind, so I have it on one of my X chromosomes, but because the other one is not, it's taking over this one. But if I had a child, that child was male, he has 50% chances of getting my X chromosome with colorblind a gene here. So that's the reason why it's much rarer in women than in men. But it's still a lot of people. And so again, why? It's just because you're not colorblind yourself, you don't think about that. And even with a colorblind dad, oftentimes I don't remember. Like sometimes we tell my dad, hey, can you throw that in the green bean? It's like, why are you telling me colors? I don't know. And we forget all the time. And I'm very sensitive to that because my dad is colorblind. And still then I forget. And that's very natural and human thing to do, to forget about these things. And so it's unless you have a diverse team or you have experts and like accessibility experts, and you can have like diversity experts and people like working in culturalization. There's not a lot of people doing that. It's Kate Edwards in the game industry who's doing that. But these people are experts, and they are gonna, we have lists and guidelines so that we cover all our grounds. But if you don't have experts and you don't have diversity, you're just gonna fall for that, because we cannot account for everything. And it's hard for us to understand that people are different, and perception is subjective.
I'm thinking that there's so many parts where we passed where I wanted to kind of interject a question, and now you've answered a lot of them. But I want to go back to the riot thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And again, thinking about like what is best, because it's interesting because all of this stuff, because here I am, I make a game, League of Legends, hundreds of millions of people play it. This is already out there, right?
Yeah.
And I'm looking for the best people, for my team, right? And my team may not have, started out diverse, but now I'm open to anybody. I'm open to anything, right? And one thing that was really interesting about them, right, was choosing the hardcore player and defining the hardcore player as someone that plays either a MOBA or a first-person shooter.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and specifically, they had a requirement for a long time that you had to have a League of Legends character at a high level.
Yes.
So you had to play their game. You had to be an expert in their game to join their team.
Which again makes sense, right? But their game was particularly known, and these kinds of games are particularly known for having a toxic culture to begin with.
Yeah, right? I would have had that happen.
Right? So, which is interesting, right? So, right, it's kind of like this reinforcing circle, right? You kind of made the game for a certain demographic. That certain demographic ended up being exclusionary. It's hard for anyone else then to step into that gaming demographic because they already get so much.
Well, it's not too much about the demographics. It's more about the message that you're sending. You're sending the message that this game is for certain people and not others. And this company is for certain people like this game and not others. So you're exclusionary in your message itself. It's not really the demographics. It's not because you're a young man that you're going to be exclusionary. It's not that. It's just that the message is this game is for these people and that's it. And so, of course, when other people are getting interested in the game, they're going to feel rejected or they're going to be rejected by others because that's the message, whether it is subconscious or not. And in the case of Riot, it's pretty in your face, like as you were saying, it sometimes to me it sounds like a cult and you have to really be at a certain level in the game to be hired in the company back in the day. That can make sense maybe for game designers. When I was
not really.
See, so I don't even know why this a thing because
all it really does is it cuts down the amount of time that they have to train you.
Sure, but in many cases, yeah. And of course, you need to understand the game that you're working on, but you also need a fresh perspective. And this is very useful, especially for UX. If you want to have a better UX, fresh perspective is always a good one. So this is actually a good thing to have people who don't understand exactly how it works, because this is going to help you understand what is not good in your game. This is making me think of it's just an anecdote when people getting onboarded because they're a new employee and they play the game that is made internally, so they have never seen it before, and they play the first time. And they were very confused about things, about how does the map work, etc. And so they were making mistakes because it's the first time they play. But then 3 months in, they know everything about the game, and then they don't understand people who don't understand the things that they themselves did not understand 3 months ago, because today for them is so clear, and they're like, how can someone don't see that? And this is so amusing to me, because once we know something very well, we have that very strong mental model of their mental representation of what this is about. And we fail to recognize that even us ourselves, we're confused back in the day. And so that's the reason why to me, it's a problem to just only have people who understand the game from the inside out to work on the game, because then this is very homogeneous.
Yeah.
I just want to say, as a player, I so want to support that. I feel like there's so many games where I play where, I start the game and I'm like, how can anyone understand this unless they are already experts at these kinds of games?
Yeah.
I always kind of assumed the problem was me, But of course, you know, if I assume the problem is me, that's going to discourage me from playing the game because, you know, this game must be for somebody else.
Right. It's a problem with mature genres where there's so much expectation amongst the fans of the genre of having all of these features that there's and all these features need to be available to them from the get-go because they're fans of the genre. They know this stuff. But what it means is that as the genre matures, the number of players that can jump into it gets smaller and smaller and smaller. So new players can't join. And so it's a problem.
Yeah, it is, and again, there's a lot of assumptions. Say if you're making a new game, a new franchise, like new people gonna come in, even if they're hardcore gamers, they're gonna miss out on some information. Like I saw that all the time when I was doing playtesting, even with like hardcore gamers, like quote unquote, on the genre, they miss stuff because it's the same. If you make a MOBA and people are playing MOBAs, they're not game designers, so they don't necessarily know what rules carry over from one game to the other and what is something, you know, that's different in your game. They don't necessarily know for your game what is most important. And so they are going to make mistakes and they are going to be frustrated. And I worked on games that are supposedly for hardcore gamers, and I saw them fail just because there was that assumption that, hardcore gamers, they're just going to get it. But turns out, well, they're not super excited about your game and not all their friends are playing. They are not going to go through the pain of trying to understand your game, especially since they have like thousands of other games that they can play. So this is not even a good assumption. It's only gonna work. Sorry, I'm just gonna end up. It's only gonna maybe work if your game is a big success, and then you have like if you like a game like Fortnite today. It is such a big phenomenon that, you know, people, if they want to get in, they are going to go through the pain of the onboarding and trying to understand how building works. They are going to go through the pain of watching others on YouTube to try to figure out how to play, or on Twitch, because their friends are playing and they want to be part of it. But that's one game out of a million that, you know, can get away with that.
Right, and I should say that this was a game that you worked on. That's part of your bio, is that you at Epic Games you worked on. So you must have done something right, because it's been a huge game, particularly for getting new players into shooters. Right, and shooters is one of these older genres, which is hard for new people to get into. Yeah,
so Fortnite, it's an amazing team, and I really loved working with them. They really had that UX philosophy at every level, so they always thought about a new player, how they're gonna understand it. I mostly worked on the Save the World mode, just to be clear, but it's the theme that called the mechanics and all the systems are the same, and so there's a lot of work on making sure that that's going to be understandable. The first time you see an icon, can you understand it? If you die, can you understand why, and just jump back in? So there's two different things. There's the onboarding that you can do to help people learn about these things. And there's a lot of work on what we call form follows function and affordance, so that just by looking at something, hearing something, manipulating something, you can understand it naturally or intuitively, which is like a weird word because there's a lot of work behind making things quote unquote intuitive. There was not a lot of work on onboarding for Battle Royale, and that was my fear, that players, because when you play Battle Royale, it's the free mode, so you did not go necessarily through the long onboarding that we had on Save the World, and so you can just, there were a lot of things that were made intuitive, you understand what's going on, but the building part is hard. This is not, and it's not because it's not a good work that was done on Form Force Function. It's just a complex system. And so I was really worried that players would be frustrated by not understanding the building component. And at the end of the day, I have a lot of people asking me, hey, how do I build better? And this is something that is lacking currently in Battle Royale. It's a bit better now that you have the creative mode, so you can try stuff and train yourself at building. But at the beginning, there is just, if you wanted to train yourself at building better, it's either you pay for Save the World or just start another battle royale game, and with all the people around you, try to figure that out. So it's not ideal for people to learn. But there was a lot of work on making things as intuitive as possible.
Do you know whether, I mean, I don't have a good view into this, but do you know whether that game has done well in attracting people, a diverse population of players?
I have no idea because I don't work there anymore, so
Right.
I don't know. I would say that it's become very popular. This is something that I really enjoyed from the beginning when I joined Epic, especially with Fortnite, because from the beginning there were a lot of different characters in Fortnite, different skin tones, different styles. Different body types, even for women. And that was exciting because that is so rare. And so that's one of the things that I enjoyed in Fortnite. I want to believe that this is also part of the success of Fortnite. I have no idea, but
Well, I think it's all part of it, right?
It's all part of it. And I would love for people to talk more about it, that it is much more diverse. You have a lot of different characters. And so it's more inviting for everyone. So
and it's become a huge mass market success. So
yeah, I mean, that is accumulation of a lot of things, and so there's a lot of luck in there. It's really always hard to tell why this becomes such a phenomenon, but it's probably a lot of little things just like adding up and made it like so popular. But I really hope, I have no idea. It would be great to know if this game is actually more inclusive than other games. I'd love to know that.
I want to bring you guys back a little bit.
Okay.
So, God, I always have an agenda. So, we've talked a lot about kind of the value of diversity, right? Kind of bring it in there, and of the biases that can lead you to kind of fail to see the value of diversity, and B, the value of your candidates, right? But let's go back to the what is the current situation in terms of diversity in the gaming industry? Because I noticed also, Celia, you talked first about someone going to get a computer science degree. But of course, that's only one small part of the people that work in the video game industry, right? What's the composition like today in terms of diversity? Let's say
It's not good.
It's not good. I'm not surprised it's not good, but kind of where are we as far as things go, and why do you think that is? But let's start with the first one. Where are we at this point?
So in terms of men, women, I think it's about 20% women in the game industry. I don't have in mind the IGDA numbers. So IGDA is sending a survey every year, so it's giving us an idea of who's in the workforce in the game industry. But I've been in companies when I was looking around, and I felt I was like among 5% of women in the company. So it depends. The 20% something number is like overall, but it really drastically depends on the company. So it is a big problem. The origin of that is multiple things. It's the fact that, women were not probably feeling welcome, or this is not, when you think about a video game developer, you think about like a nerd that is a guy in his basement, I don't know. And you don't have a lot of women in computer science. We had women at the beginning in the game industry. They did not stay, and there's actually a lot of churn from women in the game industry. Even if they are excited to start in the game industry, they are not included. So there's a big difference between diversity and inclusion. You can have a diverse workforce, but then the marginalized people and women are not included. They don't have a seat at the table, or they reach the glass ceiling, or they experience harassment. And like we've seen a lot of cases of that, like even like very big companies like Ubisoft. And you see that even if you get women to get in, they leave because they're tired of that crap. So there's a lot of problems here. And as women, people of color, people with disabilities, they're either not hired, or when they're hired, they're not set for success and they don't have a seat at the table.
Right. And let me add too that I've been blessed, and this is for the other game designers and game people out there. I've been blessed to work with a lot of really strong women in my career, and I think I've had sort of a rare experience because of it. But I've had strong, wonderful women bosses pretty much all the way through my career, and it's been great. So
me too, actually. I had a lot of women.
If anybody out there is worried about like promoting women into positions of power, please don't.
Yeah, I don't know why would anyone be worried about that. Yeah, I don't know, but I do know there's a lot of implicit biases happening. So we know, like, for example, for recruitment, if your job description is adding a lot of stuff in there, women have a tendency to reply to a position if they fit 100% of the skill sets, whereas men is more about if they fit 60%. Why is that so? This is not even an interesting debate. Women should, reply to a thing if they only fit 60%. But the thing is, this is what we see. And so because we know that, the more you add in your nice to have list, well, the less women are going to answer. Or if you have women in your company and you do, every year you do 360 review, so all the people interacting with that employees is reviewing that employee, and that person is also self-reviewing. We know that women have a tendency to be harsher on themselves than men, and so if you use that as a data point to see who are you going to promote, well, that's going to sway you in one direction, and so that's all the little things that we see. There's also, I've experienced the availability heuristic. So the availability heuristic is not only difficult to say, but it's the fact that we going to bring up to mind elements that are more available in memory. So for example, if you ask, what is a dangerous animal, like, a lot of people would think about sharks, even though sharks only kill about 5 people per year. They're not going to bring up mosquitoes when they're, killing 700,000 people a year because of malaria and other mosquitoes-borne diseases. But the thing is, at the workplace, that also happens. So I've had a weird conversation one day where someone was saying, well, we don't know how we can make sure to make women more successful in the company. Like we hear stories of a lot of women crying during their reviews, and I'm like, what? Because I also see men crying at these reviews. But the thing is, we're gonna just focus on the thing that matches our expectation and what is available in mind. So like women are emotional, they're gonna cry, and so now we forget about all the times where men were emotional, and we just we hang on to that, what we call also the confirmation bias, and it goes well together because that's confirming a bias. We're just going to remember that piece of information much better than others. And this is when you end up having weird conversation with people just remembering some parts of a story and not the other part, and just because of all these biases. Our memory is not great. We have a very selective memory. And because of that, we end up in the end misjudging a situation or people. And this is how we perpetuate discriminations. So there are many, many problems that are accumulating. And so it's not that complicated to solve. It's just when there's a will, there's a way.
Right.
It's hard to say, not that complicated to solve, even though clearly lots of companies are having a hard time solving it. And mind you, of course, this is not a video game industry exclusive problem, right? And it's especially a problem in creative industry.
Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, we work at a film school. The film industry's problem with this are at least as big. It's interesting also because at the same time, you talked about availability heuristic, right? Confirmation biases, all these things. In other words, our brains are literally working against solving this problem. That does make it seem like it's a challenge. So what can we do, right, to, whether with our brain or with anything else, right, to, let's say, hold on to more women in the industry?
So it's a challenge today because our society has been exclusive for so long. It didn't have to be exclusive to begin with, but because of that, we perpetuate that. But it's not that complicated to solve in the sense that there are solutions. I mean, if you really want to have a diverse workplace, it is possible, absolutely, to hire women in marginalized populations. They are there, and if you want to find them, you will find them. So that's what I mean by it's not that hard to solve for. Of course, if there's only 30% women versus 70% men graduating in computer science, you're going to have less women at the end to hire. But we can also solve for that. It's just going to take a bit more years to make it more even, but it's not unsolvable. It's just
but
like...
That's just computer science, though. What about...
There's a big push right now to get more girls into STEM classes at an early age. So I'm hoping that will help us.
No, absolutely. But the problem is that, at some point, so you have the majority of people who just want to do good and they're a bit lost, they don't really know, and they don't know what they don't know, and they do just perpetuate things. That is a bit complicated, I agree, but it's just by understanding how it works, you can make it better. If you can just understand the biases, you can change your company, you change your hiring process, you change your promotion process so that you can get away from those biases. Only that is going to make things a bit better. The problem that I see in most cases is actually you have a small percentage of people who don't want the workplace to be more diverse because it means less room for them. So that happens as well. And if this person is a position of power, why would that person just share the power with other people? So this is how you end up with a small percentage of people. There's the same problem we see in society, all the inequalities. Yeah, there are things, of course, there are biases, but there's also just small percentages just going to do whatever they can to just keep their power and their wealth. And this is how inequality trickles down just because of a small percentage.
Right.
Guys, can I ask an ignorant question? Because I am not in the game industry. And I always wonder, I mean, Andy, I know your background, and and I did some programming earlier on when I was a web designer. But Celia keeps saying computer science. What is the background for people working in the game industry? I'm assuming it's much, much, much wider than that, right? And I know that our game design students, right? God, about half of them come from art backgrounds.
So you have design, right? Of course, you have design, computer science, art. You have also not a lot of women who are game designer. And this is weird too. But typically in companies, you will see where the women are in art, in UX. Yay, UX. I hope you know that UX is much more inclusive than other areas because we are literally talking about all these things. But typically you don't see a lot of women programmers, or you don't see a lot of women game designer.
Right, though it's
so it's not just a computer science problem. I agree with you.
Right, and these are big companies, right, where management can also come, of course, I'm assuming, from business rather than from design. Right.
Yeah.
Okay, Celia, so I'm going to put you on the spot here and ask you, I'm curious what you feel about this question. So when we talk about sexual inequality in the film industry, right? I ask my students, what do you guys think about gender quotas, right? So gender quotas is the idea that there should be some sort of quotas, some sort of space. The film industry, for those of you who don't know, I think it's worse than the game industry in terms of sexual equality.
Really?
Oh yeah. I mean, it's. I don't think it's as bad as the game industry in terms of toxic culture. And the game industry is more complicated than the film industry because it has such a cultural component. But in terms of, I mean, God, the number of female directors, like 9%. I mean, it's, it's really, really. So when we talk about something like Frances McDermott, when she won her Oscar a few years ago, she said, I have two words for you. Inclusion writer, I think was what she said. And people are like, what the hell is that? And the idea was, right, that companies would take essentially some sort of voluntary gender quotas where they would say, we are committed on this project to hire, let's say, 40% women across the board, right? That would be one kind of gender quotas. And there's lots of different kinds of gender quotas, whether they're voluntary, so a company decides to do this. Like the BBC has a policy now where 50% of the experts that they're going to interview are going to be women, right? That's like a voluntary quota. Then there's like incentivized quotas where governments could, let's say, give companies tax breaks if they meet certain gender quotas. And then there's like mandatory quotas like we have here in California, where if you're going to have a board, for every, I think, 5 members on your board, you got to have at least one woman, right? So, a 20% kind of minimum, right? I'm just curious, what do you think about that as a potential solution for the current state of gender inequality in the game industry?
Yeah, so it's a complex question, but let's say it's a good enforcing function that hopefully should only be a transition until we have better gender equality, and so then we don't perpetuate this discriminations just through our biases that we have. It's if you make people realize what's going on and say, why do you only have one woman or no women at all, or no person of color on your team? What is that all about? Like, you need to make room for more people. And if we understand that it's only going to enrich us, it's going to enrich your company to have more women and people of color. It's going to enrich our society if it's better, everybody's better represented. To me, it doesn't make any sense to have a government representatives that do not represent the diversity of their constituents. That doesn't, to me, it's just weird how we can believe that we can represent everybody if not everybody is represented to begin with. So for some elements, it is really important to make sure that everyone is represented. Quotas is just a way to say, hey, you will find a way. And if you're forced to find a way, guess what? People find a way and the world is not collapsing. So it's just a way to show that it is doable and it is actually going to make things better. And then once people understand that, it can work better. The only problem with that is that people resist because then they say, well, this is unfair. Why don't we hire the best people for the job? That's because they don't understand that the people who are best for the job aren't the ones hired to begin with. Because of these biases, when you believe that's the best person for the job, but you fell for the in-group bias, for example. So that's the problem, that it is not a meritocracy to begin with. So it's not that it's shaking meritocracy, it's just making the non-meritocracy at least equal for everyone. So this is more the way I see it, so that people can understand a little bit what's going on. And the thing that I would recommend is not to say, well, at least hire 30% women. What I would say is that make sure that your company or your association, whatever it is not more than 70% homogeneous. It sounds different when you say your company is 70% homogeneous. I mean, for 70% of the people there, it's white men and they all look the same. That is weird. So if we speak more in terms of homogeneity, homogeneity, and put the big number first, like you are at 80% homogeneity, we're trying to go back down to maximum 70% of homogeneity. It sounds different than you say, well, we need to hire for at least 30% women.
Yeah, that's,
you see what I mean?
Interesting. Right.
It's just, why is it weird to have 30% women? Don't you find that weird to have 70% people are the same?
And it even feels weird to even use that as a target number.
Yeah.
Like, why is that even a target? Why shouldn't the target number be 50?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, there's lots of reasons for that, right? For, people have different interests, right? People have essentially different things they want to do with their lives, right?
Sure.
There's no need for an expectation that men and women might want to do everything in exactly the same way, though that still leaves this huge space in between, right? To take whatever gender gaps you have in whatever industries you have and see that there's room for them to shrink and maybe shrink a whole lot or maybe go to the middle. But there's no need to assume that we'll ever reach a perfect middle, except maybe Celia was mentioning, like I think, governments, maybe that's maybe one where if we're being gender binary, right, where you might have, some sort of equal. And I think, does France have gender quotas for parliament?
I think it's more that they're trying to make it better and don't look like they're sexist, so they're trying to make an effort there. But I don't think there's a real quota that they have to reach. I have to check because I don't really remember. But just to go back to your point, the problem is that when we say, well, it's never going to be 50-50 because women have different wants and needs, then again you open the door to biases, because then we say, well, it's okay that it's not equal because, well, women are different, right? And so when we say that, we open the door for biases. We should not assume that women don't want different things. We can assume that women have more difficulty, if they have a big family and they're the ones doing the unpaid work, that is, taking care of the kids. Of course, it's going to be harder for them to work late. But why do we have this tendency of saying that people need to be passionate and work their asses off day and night and during the weekend to be performant at their job? Again, it's just I think the problem is that we don't have the correct criteria for what it is to be successful in life and what it means to participate into the success of a company or society. And that's the reason why I was telling you at the beginning, we also need to understand what are the tests, what are they measuring? Is it the right thing that we need to measure? And so that's a bigger problem because that's understanding all the different layers of complexity here. It's really hard to unravel, but it is also a problem to believe that maybe women don't want to, participate into government positions, or is it because it seems so aggressive and it seems like to be all about measuring how far you're going to pee, that women don't feel that they can compete in this area?
Right, and notice this isn't. I wasn't talking about government. I was talking about industry. But notice, I totally agree with your larger point here, right? Which is just like you started this by talking about computer science, graduates, right? Of course, you're going back here and going further, right? What are the reasons for there being different levels of graduates? Some is personal taste, but obviously there is so much in our society that makes it harder for women to work in the first place, in terms of social expectations. And, companies exist within this larger cultural ecosystem, right? That feed into them. And there is some sense where we're never going to solve this problem unless we kind of pay attention to the larger, to the larger issues involved.
You have a lot of kids that are just afraid of math. But that's also because the way we teach math, it's very abstract and it's not, purposeful. And so a lot of kids don't get it. And so now you self-select kids who can, are not afraid to try to understand it. And why should we do that? We saw many cases where, kids have offered a different way of learning, and when we tell them that it's a growth mindset, so that it's not because you're a math person or not a math person, so that everything can be learned. It's just if you persevere and if you work hard enough, you'll get there. And so if you keep doing things that saying, well, you're either a math person or not a math person, and then you add on top of it, well, women are typically not good at math. This is when, you can make kids in a young age believe that this is not for them. And so why should they even investigate? And so the taste that you're talking about, how much is it influenced from the toys that you're playing with, or from society? It's hard to tell. I mean, we don't have a good research to really measure the impact of that, but there is some sort of impact. And so even if it's light, we should address that.
Well, honestly, so this has been great. We've taken more of your time than we intended, and we've been very grateful for you for this. So if you don't mind, I think this is probably a good spot to end this particular episode. We'd love to have you back sometime.
Yes, please.
With pleasure.
So Celia, thank you so much for being on the show. Listeners, buy her books, join her webinars. You can find her at celiahodent.com.
I'm on Twitter also. I'm a very active Twitter person.
Okay, and on Twitter.
Yes, you are. Yes. I've been enjoying your tweets.
Oh, really? I love Twitter.
All right, good podcast. By the way, Celia, this is automatically. We ended up having this little thing at the end of our podcast where we say good podcast, like good game.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you wanna participate in it, do. Otherwise, don't.
So what do I have to say? Good game? Is that what?
Good podcast. Good podcast.
Good podcast.
Good podcast, Andy.
Good podcast.
Play nice, everybody. You can subscribe and listen to all of our episodes wherever you listen to podcasts.